The courtroom had already decided who he was before anyone bothered to learn his name. One glance was enough for a uniformed bailiff to assume he didn't belong, and within moments, a respected black man was escorted out in front of lawyers, reporters, and strangers who never questioned what they were seeing. It was humiliating, it was public. And it was exactly what everyone expected until the courtroom doors opened again. Minutes later, the very man who had been thrown out returned wearing the judge's robe, leaving every person inside frozen in stunned silence. How did a single act of prejudice turn into the most unforgettable lesson that courthouse would ever witness? Stay with us, because what happened next changed far more than one man's reputation. Long before that unforgettable morning inside the courthouse, the man at the center of the story had spent decades earning something that could never be handed to him overnight: respect. His name was Isaiah Carter, and nearly everyone who worked in the city's justice system knew it. Judges admired his discipline. Court clerks trusted his fairness. Young law students quietly studied his career, hoping one day to build a reputation even half as strong. None of it had come easily. Isaiah had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunity always seemed to stop one block too soon. Every achievement required twice the effort, every success invited new skepticism, and every mistake, no matter how small, was remembered longer than anyone else's. Those lessons stayed with him for life. Instead of allowing bitterness to define him, he focused on something stronger. He believed that integrity could outlast prejudice, even if prejudice refused to disappear. Every case he handled, every person he mentored, and every decision he made reflected that belief. He understood that justice was not simply about knowing the law. It was about treating every person with dignity, especially those whom society had already judged. Over the years, Isaiah quietly became one of the most respected legal minds in the state. His career stretched across decades of public service, earning recognition from colleagues who valued his calm judgment and unwavering professionalism. Yet outside the courthouse walls, strangers rarely saw any of that. They saw only the color of his skin before they saw the man himself. It was a reality he had learned to navigate with remarkable patience. Expensive suits could be mistaken for borrowed clothes. Professional confidence could be misread as arrogance. Walking into prestigious buildings often meant enduring suspicious glances that others never noticed. Isaiah never pretended those moments didn't hurt. He simply refused to let them determine who he was. On that particular morning, the courthouse buzzed with unusual energy. Reporters gathered near the entrance. Attorneys hurried through security carrying stacks of files. Court employees whispered about an important judicial ceremony scheduled to begin within the hour. The building felt different, charged with anticipation, though very few people knew exactly why. Isaiah arrived earlier than almost everyone else. He stepped out of his car wearing a tailored dark suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had accompanied him through countless milestones. There was nothing flashy about him. His confidence came from experience rather than appearance. He acknowledged familiar faces with polite nods and continued toward the courthouse entrance, focused on the responsibilities waiting inside. As he crossed the marble lobby, he noticed something subtle. Several unfamiliar security officers had been assigned to the building. Their expressions were tense, their movements unusually alert. They watched every visitor with careful attention, but one officer's eyes lingered on Isaiah just a little longer than the others. It was a look Isaiah had encountered many times throughout his life. A silent calculation, a quiet assumption, a decision made before a single word had been spoken. He kept walking, choosing not to react. Experience had taught him that confronting every suspicious glance would consume a lifetime. Most of the time, the best response was simply to continue forward. But this morning would not be like the others. Within minutes, one snap judgment would trigger a chain of events that would expose the difference between authority and wisdom, between appearance and truth. Before the courthouse clock struck the next hour, the man many assumed did not belong there would become the one person every soul inside was forced to stand for. Isaiah continued toward the main courtroom with the same quiet confidence that had carried him through an entire career. Every step echoed across the polished marble floors, blending with the hurried footsteps of attorneys, reporters, and courthouse staff preparing for one of the most significant mornings of the year. To everyone else, it looked like another ordinary day inside the justice system. Then everything changed. Before Isaiah reached the courtroom doors, a uniformed bailiff stepped directly into his path. The interruption was immediate, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Without asking who Isaiah was or why he was there, the bailiff's attention fixed on his briefcase, then on his face, as though he had already reached a conclusion. Nearby conversations slowed. Heads began to turn. The atmosphere shifted from routine to uncomfortable in seconds. Isaiah remained calm. Years of experience had taught him that moments like these rarely began with shouting. They started with assumptions, a suspicious glance, a misplaced accusation, a quiet belief that someone simply did not belong. The bailiff motioned for Isaiah to step aside. Court employees passing through the hallway glanced over before quickly looking away. No one wanted to become involved. Some appeared uncomfortable, while others accepted the scene without question. It was the kind of silent acceptance that allowed unfair treatment to unfold in plain sight. Isaiah calmly reached for identification. He never had the chance to present it. The bailiff cut him off, insisting that restricted areas were only for authorized personnel. The words carried certainty, as though no explanation could possibly change the decision already made. Isaiah didn't argue. Instead, he waited. He had learned long ago that prejudice often revealed itself most clearly when it was allowed to speak uninterrupted. But the situation only became worse. A second security officer approached. Then a third. Within moments, Isaiah found himself surrounded, not because he had threatened anyone, broken any rule, or caused any disturbance, but because one assumption had rapidly transformed into unquestioned certainty. People stopped walking. Attorneys whispered among themselves. A television reporter standing nearby subtly turned her camera toward the growing commotion, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. The humiliation was no longer private. It had become a public spectacle. The bailiff gestured toward the courthouse exit. To everyone watching, it appeared as though an unauthorized visitor had been caught attempting to enter a restricted courtroom. Curious spectators filled the hallway, many accepting that version of events without asking a single question. Others looked uneasy but remained silent, unwilling to challenge the authorities standing before them. Isaiah could feel dozens of eyes following him. He had spent decades earning the trust of the legal community, yet in this moment none of those accomplishments seemed visible. His education, his service, and his reputation disappeared beneath a single, damaging assumption. Still, his expression never changed. He picked up his briefcase, turned, and walked toward the courthouse doors with quiet dignity. Some interpreted his silence as defeat. Others believed justice had been served. Neither could have been more mistaken. Outside, the morning air felt strangely peaceful compared to the tension inside. Isaiah paused on the courthouse steps and looked back at the towering building where he had devoted so much of his life. There was no anger on his face, no panic, only a calm resolve that suggested the story unfolding inside those walls was far from over. Then he reached into his briefcase. Inside rested a neatly folded black judicial robe. Carefully, he lifted it into the sunlight. At that exact moment, inside the courtroom, officials announced that the ceremony was about to begin, but there was one problem no one could explain. The guest of honor, the man about to take the bench, was nowhere to be found. Inside the courtroom, confusion spread faster than anyone could contain it. The gallery was filled. Reporters adjusted their cameras. Attorneys checked their watches. Court staff exchanged uneasy glances as whispers rippled through the room. The judicial appointment ceremony, scheduled down to the minute, had come to a complete standstill. No one understood why. The chief clerk repeatedly looked toward the entrance, expecting the honored guest to appear at any second. Instead, only silence answered. Then came the question no one wanted to ask. Where was Judge Isaiah Carter? The words landed like a shockwave. Several officials looked at one another in disbelief. A few immediately reached for their phones. Others hurried into the hallway, searching every nearby office. Within moments, someone quietly explained that there had been an incident near the courtroom entrance involving courthouse security. The room fell still. The realization spread with alarming speed. The man everyone was desperately searching for was the same man who had just been escorted out of the building. Outside, Isaiah stood calmly on the courthouse steps, carefully placing the black judicial robe over his shoulders. There was no anger in his movements, no dramatic display, only quiet dignity. He straightened the robe with practiced hands, picked up his briefcase, and turned toward the courthouse entrance once again. This time, the same doors opened before he even reached them. Court administrators rushed forward, their expressions drained of confidence. The confidence they had carried minutes earlier had been replaced by unmistakable panic. Behind them stood the bailiff whose decision had set everything in motion. The confidence on his face was gone. For the first time that morning, uncertainty replaced authority. As Isaiah walked back through the courthouse lobby, every conversation stopped. Lawyers stepped aside. Security officers lowered their eyes. Employees who had watched in silence only minutes earlier now stood frozen, realizing they had witnessed prejudice unfold without a single person asking the simplest question.
Who is this man? The answer now surrounded them.
Framed photographs along the hallway displayed Isaiah receiving legal awards, speaking at judicial conferences, and mentoring young attorneys.
His name appeared on plaques honoring decades of public service. The courthouse itself had celebrated his career for years.
Yet none of those accomplishments had mattered when assumptions took control. The courtroom doors opened. Every person inside instinctively rose to their feet. The same spectators who had watched him leave in humiliation now watched him return with the authority that had always been his.
Reporters quickly turned their cameras.
Pens raced across notepads.
No one wanted to miss what happened next. Isaiah walked toward the bench without rushing.
Every step echoed through the silent courtroom. The distance was short, but it felt symbolic, each stride dismantling another assumption that had been made about him only minutes before.
He reached the bench. He turned. He looked across the packed courtroom. His face revealed neither triumph nor resentment, only disappointment.
Not disappointment in one individual, but in a system where appearances had spoken louder than identity, experience, and truth. That silence became heavier than any speech could have been.
No one needed an explanation. Everyone understood. The bailiff remained near the courtroom entrance, unable to meet Isaiah's eyes. Moments earlier, he had exercised unquestioned authority.
Now he stood face to face with the consequences of a judgment formed before a single conversation had taken place.
The courtroom had witnessed something far greater than personal embarrassment. It had witnessed how quickly prejudice could disguise itself as procedure, and how easily ordinary people could become participants simply by remaining silent.
As Isaiah prepared to begin the ceremony, one thought lingered over everyone in the room. If this could happen to the man about to become a judge, how many others had walked through those same doors with no robe to reveal who they truly were?
The ceremony eventually began. The cameras kept rolling.
The reporters filled pages with what had happened that morning, but the most important moment was not the appointment itself. It was the silence that settled over the courtroom before a single word was spoken from the bench. It was the silence of people forced to confront a truth they had witnessed with their own eyes. Isaiah Carter accepted the robe that symbolized the highest responsibility in the courtroom, but he carried something heavier than authority into that role. He carried experience. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated before introducing himself. He knew what it meant to have years of sacrifice erased by a stranger's assumption. And now, as he looked across the courtroom, he understood that justice was not only about interpreting laws. It was also about recognizing the humanity that prejudice so often overlooks.
In the days that followed, the courthouse launched a formal review of the incident.
Procedures that had gone unquestioned for years were examined with fresh eyes.
Staff members underwent additional training focused on unconscious bias, professional conduct, and respectful treatment of every person entering the building. The goal was not simply to assign blame, but to ensure that no one else would experience the same humiliation because of assumptions made in a matter of seconds. The bailiff's actions carried consequences, but Isaiah never allowed the story to become about revenge. He understood that one person's mistake had exposed a much larger problem, one that existed far beyond a single courthouse. Bias rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it appears in quiet assumptions, quick judgments, and decisions made before facts are known. Those moments can shape lives, careers, and communities in ways that are easy to ignore unless someone is willing to confront them. For Isaiah, the incident became another chapter in a lifetime spent proving that character cannot be measured by appearance. He continued serving with the same humility and integrity that had defined his career long before anyone questioned whether he belonged. Ironically, the very humiliation meant to diminish him became the moment that inspired countless young people.
Law students, aspiring judges, and future public servants saw more than a courtroom mistake.
They saw resilience. They saw dignity under pressure.
Most importantly, they saw that true authority does not come from a title or a robe, it comes from the values a person carries when everything else is stripped away. The story spread well beyond the courthouse walls. People debated how quickly assumptions can become accepted as truth. They questioned why so few bystanders spoke up. They reflected on the uncomfortable reality that prejudice often survives not because everyone agrees with it, but because too many people remain silent while it unfolds.
That may be the hardest lesson of all.
Most acts of discrimination are not witnessed by millions.
They happen in hallways, in workplaces, at schools,
in stores, at airports, inside offices and courtrooms. They begin with a look, an assumption, or a decision made before someone has the chance to tell their story. The next time we see someone being judged before they're known, the question is not whether we notice it. The question is what we choose to do about it. Because every person deserves to be seen before they are judged. Every person deserves dignity before assumptions. And every act of fairness, no matter how small, has the power to challenge injustice where it begins. If this story made you stop and think, share it with someone who believes that respect should never depend on race, appearance, or first impressions. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed someone being unfairly judged before anyone knew who they really were? And if you had been standing in that courtroom, would you have remained silent, or would you have been the one person willing to ask the question that could have changed everything?